This deal did not arrive quietly. It did not emerge from routine diplomacy. It did not come after years of peaceful consensus. It landed like a seismic shockwave, just days after the most furious diplomatic rupture in NATO's 77-year history. Europe and India signed a trade agreement so massive, so strategically deliberate, that it effectively redraws the global economic map. And it happened while Washington was watching, or more accurately, while Washington was yelling. The world is used to political noise. Presidents argue, leaders posture, summits end with carefully worded statements that change very little. But what unfolded this week was not noise. It was structure. It was movement. It was governments quietly deciding that the United States can no longer be treated as the stable center of the Western order. Not temporarily, not until the next election, but structurally. For decades, the unspoken rule of global politics was simple. If you were Europe, your security depended on Washington. If you were a major economy, your prosperity depended on access to the American market. If you were a rising power, your long-term strategy revolved around either aligning with the United States or counterbalancing it. That rule is now breaking, not with explosions, not with coups, not with declarations of war, but with signatures, with trade corridors, with memorandums, with closed-door meetings that do not include American officials. The narrative that NATO is strained is outdated. The narrative that the alliance is under pressure is insufficient. As of this morning, NATO is operationally paralyzed, not because a single treaty was torn up, not because a formal vote took place, but because trust, the invisible currency that powers alliances, has collapsed. And when trust collapses, systems freeze. World leaders are no longer asking how to fix the relationship with Washington. They are asking how to function without it. That distinction matters, because trying to fix something implies you expect it to continue. Preparing to function without it means you believe it is already gone. The United States is currently withdrawing from 66 international organizations, institutions that were built over generations, institutions designed specifically to keep American power embedded in global rulemaking. At the same time, tariffs of up to 41% are being imposed on America's closest allies: Britain, Germany, Canada, France, Japan, South Korea, countries that fought beside American troops for decades, countries whose soldiers died alongside Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. That context matters, because when those countries respond, they are not doing it emotionally. They are doing it mathematically. They are not reacting. They are restructuring. Today's EU-India mega deal is not a protest. It is not symbolic. It is not a warning. It is a replacement architecture. Europe and India are quietly saying, if the United States no longer wants to anchor the global system, we will build one without it. This is not about whether you like Donald Trump. This is not about whether you hate Donald Trump. It is about power. It is about systems. It is about how superpowers actually lose influence, not through dramatic collapse, but through slow exclusion, with empty chairs, with phone calls that stop coming, with deals that happen somewhere else. To understand why European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi are smiling in New Delhi today, you first have to understand why leaders in London and Berlin are furious. Because the spark was not a policy document. It was not a classified memo. It was a sentence. Last Thursday on Fox Business, President Trump was asked to defend his renewed threats to leave NATO and reduce America's commitments to European security. He claimed that during the war in Afghanistan, America's allies stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. Not some allies, not in certain operations, everyone. To many American viewers, this sounded like familiar rhetoric. America does the heavy lifting, America pays the bills, others take advantage. But to European leaders, it sounded like erasure, because the record is not ambiguous. The United Kingdom lost 457 service members in Afghanistan. Canada lost 158. Germany lost 59. Denmark, a nation of barely 6 million people, suffered one of the highest per capita casualty rates of the entire coalition. These troops were not guarding warehouses. They were fighting in Helmand and Kandahar. They were conducting raids and patrols alongside American Marines. When Trump said they stayed back, he was not insulting politicians. He was insulting widows, parents, entire national memories. For the first time in decades, Allied leaders did not swallow it. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer publicly rebuked a sitting U.S. president, calling the comments appalling and deeply insulting. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius went on national television and demanded an apology, saying it is disrespectful to speak about the deaths of allies that way and simply false. This was not about hurt feelings. It was about shattered trust. NATO's Article 5 only works if allies believe the United States will actually care enough to defend them. When the American president dismisses Allied sacrifice, he is signaling that American blood should not be spent for others. That makes Article 5 a question mark. European leaders began asking a brutal question. If Washington does not respect our dead, will Washington defend our living? Once that question appears, alliances begin to die. Quietly, behind closed doors, defense ministries across Europe began internal reviews, not about whether to leave NATO, but about what Europe needs to survive if NATO fails. For years, Europe talked about strategic autonomy as a theory, a dream, a French talking point. Trump's comments turned it into doctrine. At the same time, trade negotiations with India that had stalled for nearly 2 decades suddenly became urgent because Europe realized something else. You cannot rely on a partner for security while being economically at war with them. And Europe is now in an economic war with Washington. Steel tariffs, auto tariffs, technology restrictions, retaliatory duties. So Europe went shopping for a new anchor, not a replacement superpower, but a balancing partner, a massive market, a democracy, a country with long-term growth. They found India. India had its own reasons to say yes. India has been hit by American tariffs. Indian companies face visa uncertainty. Indian exports are targeted under reciprocal trade schemes. Indian leaders see the same volatility Europe sees. An unpredictable superpower is worse than a weaker but stable one. So both sides hedged, not against America as a nation, but against America as a source of stability. That hedge became today's deal. On paper, it is called a trade agreement. In reality, it is a strategic realignment disguised as economics. It creates a free trade zone covering more than 2 billion people, over 1/4 of humanity. 96% of European exports entering India become tariff-free. India, historically one of the most protectionist major economies on earth, opened its doors. German cars once faced tariffs of around 110% in India. Under the New Deal, that drops to 10%. Machinery tariffs disappear. Chemical tariffs disappear. Pharmaceutical tariffs disappear. Wine and spirits tariffs are slashed. European manufacturers now gain direct access to a rising Indian middle class, projected to exceed 500 million people. At the same time, the United States has imposed new tariffs on European goods, making the American market less attractive. Europe is swapping the U.S. consumer for the Indian consumer. In return, 99% of Indian exports to Europe become tariff-free. Textiles, leather, jewelry, engineering goods, processed foods. Millions of Indian jobs now depend more on Europe than on America. This is not punishment, it is bypass. Supply chains begin reorienting, components sourced from India, products designed for European standards, shipping routes optimized for EU-India trade. Once supply chains move, they rarely return. This is the nightmare for Washington. Not that Europe dislikes America, but that Europe no longer needs America. Isolation sounds powerful, but in modern economics, isolation means shrinkage. Tariffs act like taxes. Prices rise, inflation rises, wages lag, but the bigger danger is lost access. American farmers rely on exports. Under the EU-India deal, European wheat enters India tariff-free. American wheat does not. Indian buyers choose Europe. That is trade diversion, silent, invisible, devastating. European companies now gain first-mover advantage in a market of 1.4 billion people. By the time Washington tries to negotiate its own deal, shelves will already be stocked with European products. Manufacturing investment follows markets. European firms have incentives to build factories in India, not America. Capital flows toward stability. Right now, Europe-India looks stable. America looks volatile. This affects currency demand. The dollar's dominance depends on being central to trade. As America becomes less central, the dollar slowly becomes less indispensable, not collapse. Erosion. Erosion raises borrowing costs. Erosion tightens budgets. Erosion limits power. Trump points to investment pledges as proof his strategy works. Some are real. Many are promises. Meanwhile, confirmed trade diversion is happening now. The United States is winning headlines and losing structure. And all of this connects back to security, because economic independence enables military independence, which brings us to Greenland. On the surface, Trump's renewed push to acquire Greenland sounds absurd. In NATO headquarters, it is alarming. Greenland is not about land. It is about the Arctic. As ice melts, new shipping lanes open. Massive resource deposits become accessible. Whoever controls Arctic access shapes future trade and military posture. The United States already has military access in Greenland. It already benefits strategically. So when Trump tried to buy Greenland from Denmark and then threatened economic consequences after Denmark refused, Europe saw something disturbing: a willingness to coerce allies, not negotiate with them. Denmark is a loyal NATO member. If Washington can threaten Denmark, it can threaten anyone. Nordic countries began reassessing their assumptions about American reliability. Europe accelerated defense integration, joint weapons programs, common procurement, shared command structures. Strategic autonomy moved from slogan to survival strategy. The EU-India deal includes cooperation on maritime security, cyber defense, and technology sharing. Conversations once held primarily with Washington are now happening without Washington. India benefits too. India faces China. India does not want dependence on any single partner. A diversified network gives India leverage. Europe gives India technology and markets. India gives Europe scale and presence in the Indo-Pacific. Together, they reduce reliance on the United States. Trump believes unpredictability creates leverage. In reality, it pushes others to design systems that do not include him. That is the irony. The harder he squeezes, the faster others slip away. History rarely announces itself. There is no banner that says the age of American primacy has ended. Instead, there are deals signed far from Washington, phone calls that don't include Washington, meetings where American seats exist, but no longer matter. America is not becoming weak. America is becoming optional. Optional is deadly. There are three paths forward: escalation, stalemate, or reversal. Everything about Trump's behavior points toward escalation or stalemate. That means the bypass world grows, a multipolar world, where the United States is one power among several, still strong, but no longer unavoidable. For Americans, this world feels like higher prices, fewer export jobs, slower growth, tighter budgets. Nothing collapses. Life just gets harder. What is being lost is leverage. America's greatest power was not its army. It was that everyone needed access to the American-led system. When others build their own system, that power evaporates. The EU-India deal is one brick in that new system. More are coming. The tragedy is that none of this was inevitable. The United States could have demanded fairer burden sharing without humiliation, could have negotiated tough but cooperative trade deals, could have remained the center. Instead, it chose threats over strategy. Trump promised America first. What emerged is America alone. The deal is signed. The ink is dry. The system is shifting. For the first time in a century, the United States is no longer the unquestioned center of global power, and the world is moving on. America did not lose its power. It is giving it away. Power in the modern world is not seized. It is granted. Other nations grant you influence when they believe you are predictable, stable, and necessary. Take away predictability, take away trust, take away necessity, and influence drains out of the system, not with a crash, not with an explosion, but with absence. That absence is already forming. European officials no longer call Washington first. They call each other. Indian ministers no longer treat U.S. trade policy as the anchor of their economic planning. They treat it as a variable. Corporate boards no longer ask, how do we expand inside the American system? They ask, how do we protect ourselves from the American system? That question alone tells you everything. For 70 years, the United States did not need to threaten allies to lead them. Leadership was assumed because America built institutions, paid for stability, guaranteed security, absorbed costs. In return, it shaped the rules. That bargain is breaking, not because the United States is poor, not because it is weak, but because it is choosing not to maintain the bargain. Trump views alliances as transactions. If you do not pay enough, you are a burden. If you disagree, you are an enemy. If you hesitate, you are ungrateful. That worldview makes loyalty impossible because no one ever knows when the price will change. Allies can live with tough partners. They cannot live with unpredictable ones. That is why Europe is not trying to punish America. It is trying to insure itself against America. Insurance is not emotional. It is rational. When your house starts catching small fires, you do not argue about whether the house is still valuable. You buy fire extinguishers. You install sprinklers. You create escape routes. Europe's sprinklers are strategic autonomy. Europe's fire exits are India, Japan, Australia, and deeper internal integration. America is no longer the only door. This shift will not reverse quickly. Even if a future U.S. president tries to repair relationships, damage has been done. Once countries invest trillions into alternative systems, they do not abandon them easily. Trust, once broken, takes generations to fully restore. The United States will still matter. It will still be powerful. It will still influence outcomes. But it will increasingly have to negotiate instead of dictate. For Americans raised during the unipolar moment, this feels unnatural. It feels like decline. In reality, it is normalization. No empire remains singular forever, but decline becomes dangerous when it is denied. The most catastrophic mistakes in history happen when powerful nations cling to a world that no longer exists. They lash out, they overreach, they miscalculate, That is the risk zone America is entering. Not collapse, not conquest, but misjudgment. The EU-India deal is a warning sign, not because it hurts American pride, but because it shows the world practicing life without American leadership, quietly, efficiently, without asking permission. This is not about loving or hating Trump. Even if Trump disappeared tomorrow, the precedent remains. Other countries now know they can build massive frameworks without Washington. They have tested it. It worked. That knowledge cannot be erased. So the real question becomes, what kind of country does America want to be in this new world? A country that tries to dominate through pressure, or a country that leads through partnership, a country that builds walls, or a country that builds rules, a country that shouts, or a country that convenes? Those choices will define whether America remains one of the architects of the future or merely one of its occupants. The tragedy is that America still has every tool it needs: the largest economy on earth, the most advanced military, world-class universities, innovation hubs, cultural influence. None of that disappeared. What is disappearing is willingness to use those tools cooperatively. Power without cooperation becomes intimidation. Intimidation breeds resistance. Resistance breeds bypass. Bypass breeds irrelevance. This is the chain reaction we are watching. Slow, quiet, relentless. The EU-India deal is not the end of American influence, but it is the clearest sign yet that the world is preparing for a future where American influence is optional. And optional is the most dangerous word in geopolitics, because once the world learns to live without you, it rarely goes back. The next few years will determine whether the United States adapts, whether it re-enters diplomacy, whether it rebuilds trust, whether it accepts that leadership in the 21st century is negotiated, not imposed, or whether it continues down the path of isolation, grievance, and confrontation. That choice belongs to Americans, but its consequences belong to everyone. The system is shifting. The alliances are rearranging. The deals are being signed, and history is moving forward, with or without Washington at the center.